My daughter called me 17 times in a single afternoon. I know because I counted them later, sitting on a rented beach chair in Tofino, watching the Pacific roll in under a gray October sky, my phone face down on the armrest. I didn't answer a single one. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house in Mississauga. And for the past 6 years, I have been quietly, dutifully, stupidly paying the rent on my daughter's apartment in downtown Toronto. 1,200 square feet on King West. Not cheap. Nothing in that city is cheap anymore. But she was my daughter, and her name is Audrey. And when she was 7 years old, she used to fall asleep on my chest watching Hockey Night in Canada. And I suppose some part of me never stopped thinking of her that way. Small, trusting, mine to look after. Her mother and I divorced when Audrey was 14. It wasn't ugly, as divorces go. We sat Audrey down together at the kitchen table in our house in Burlington and told her we still loved her, and we still loved her, and nothing about that would change. Her mother moved to Kelowna 2 years later with a man named something I won't bother writing down. Audrey stayed with me. I drove her to school for 4 years. I helped her study for her OACs. I went to every single parent-teacher interview alone, carrying a thermos of coffee, because the meetings were always at 7 in the evening, and I'd been up since 5. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this so you understand the ledger I was carrying in my head, even when I pretended I wasn't. Audrey went to Ryerson. It's called TMU now, but it was Ryerson when she went. Communications degree. She moved into residence in first year, then into a student apartment with 2 roommates for her second and third years, and I helped with her portion of rent then too, though it was modest enough that I didn't think much of it. She was a student. That's what you do. She graduated at 22 and got a job at a marketing agency on Adelaide Street. Entry level, which was fine. Entry level is how you start. I helped her find her first real apartment, a bachelor unit in Parkdale, and I paid her damage deposit because she didn't have first and last ready. Fine. She was starting out. I remembered starting out. It's hard. Then she met Curtis. Curtis was in sales. I never fully understood what he sold. Software of some kind, or solutions, which is what people in sales call software when they want it to sound more important than it is. He was 31 when Audrey brought him home the first Christmas they were together, handsome in the way that men who know they're handsome tend to be, which is to say, there was a quality of performance to it. He shook my hand firmly and called me sir in a way that made me feel I was being managed. I tried to like him. I did like him at first. He made Audrey laugh, and that seemed like enough. They moved in together after about 18 months. The apartment on King West was Curtis's idea. He wanted something with a gym in the building and a concierge, which, I remember thinking, is not how a person describes an apartment when they're worried about paying for it. Audrey came to me a few weeks before the move and told me what the rent was, $2,300 a month. I blinked. Curtis is contributing, she said quickly. We're splitting it. What's his half? She hesitated just a moment too long. We're figuring out the split. That was the beginning of the part I should have paid more attention to. What I eventually understood, not all at once, but in pieces, the way you understand things you don't want to understand, was that Curtis was contributing very little. He had what Audrey described as cash flow problems, which is a phrase that people use when they've spent more than they've earned and don't want to call it what it is. So the split they were figuring out resolved, month after month, into me covering the bulk of the rent, while Curtis covered, apparently, his car payment and their streaming subscriptions. I paid $2,300 a month into my daughter's landlord's account by e-transfer on the first of every month for 6 years. If you do the math, and I have, more than once, that's $165,600. I have the bank records. I want to be very clear. I never asked for any of it back. I'm not that kind of father. I helped because I wanted to, because she was my daughter, because I didn't want her to struggle the way I had at her age. I'm telling you the number now only because of what came later. During those 6 years, I saw Audrey regularly at first. Sunday dinners every few weeks, Her birthday. My birthday. The odd long weekend when she'd come out to Mississauga and we'd walk around the lake and get breakfast at the place on Lakeshore she'd liked since she was a teenager. Curtis came to maybe 1 in 4 of these visits, always with an excuse for the others that was plausible enough not to challenge. Work event. Old friend in town. Tired. Somewhere around year 4, the visits became less frequent. Monthly became bi-monthly. Bi-monthly became, we'll figure something out soon, Dad. Things have been crazy. I noticed it, but I didn't push. I know what it's like to be in your 30s and tired. I know what it's like to feel like there aren't enough hours. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do when you love someone. I found out about the engagement the way I found out about a lot of things in those days, from Audrey's Instagram. She posted a photo of her hand with a diamond ring and a caption that said he asked, and I said yes, with about 15 exclamation points and emojis I didn't fully understand. I texted her congratulations immediately. She texted back a heart emoji. That was the whole exchange. I assumed I'd hear more soon. Details, plans, a phone call. I waited a week. Then I called her. Dad, yes, I was going to call you. Things have just been insane. I can imagine. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm very happy for you. Thank you. It was so perfect. He did it at the restaurant where we had our first date. That's lovely. I meant it. So what are you two thinking? Have you started planning? Oh, we've been planning for a while, actually. There was something slightly careful in how she said it, a kind of vocal footnote I didn't know how to read. We have a venue and everything. We're doing it in the spring. How wonderful. Where? She told me the name of a property in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I'd driven past it once. It was the kind of place with a long gravel driveway and an iron gate. That sounds beautiful, I said. I'm looking forward to it. There was a pause. Not a long pause. Half a second, maybe. But I have turned that half second over in my mind many times since. And I believe it was the pause of a person who has just realized they need to say something they've been avoiding. Dad, she said, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. About the wedding? About the guest list and everything. It's been really complicated. Curtis's family is enormous. They have cousins he hasn't seen since he was a kid, and his mom has very strong feelings about who needs to be there, and we had to make some really hard decisions about the size of the whole thing. I said nothing. I was waiting to see where this was going. The venue has a capacity, she continued, and we've had to be really strict. So some people who we love and who matter to us aren't going to be able to come, and I wanted you to hear it from me and not feel like, Audrey. My voice came out very steady. I surprised myself. Are you telling me I'm not invited to your wedding? Another pause. It's not that you're not invited. It's just, am I on the guest list? Yes or no? The pause that followed was its own kind of answer. Dad, it's really complicated. Okay, I said. Dad, okay, Audrey. Thank you for telling me. I said goodbye, and I put the phone down on the kitchen counter, and I stood there for a while, looking out the window at the backyard where the maple tree I planted when Audrey was born was turning orange the way it does every October. I had planted that tree in the fall of 1991 when she was 3 weeks old. I brought her outside wrapped in a blanket and held her up so she could see it, and she squinted at it in that way newborns squint at everything. Like the whole world is a very bright puzzle. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I didn't cry right away. What I felt first was something duller and colder than grief. It felt like clarity. I went to my laptop and I looked at the e-transfer history in my bank account. $165,600. I sat with that number for a very long time. I did not call her back. I did not fire off a message. I did not call her mother in Kelowna, though part of me wanted to, just to say, do you know what your daughter has just told me? I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and I looked up flights. I had never been to Tofino. I had always meant to go. One of those trips that sits on the list for 20 years. Because there's always something more practical to do with a week and some money. But I'd turned 60 the year before, and I'd made myself a quiet promise that I was going to stop letting the practical eat everything else. I found a rental cottage near Cox Bay, available the 3rd week of October. The same week I noticed, as the date Audrey had mentioned when she said the venue had been booked. I booked the cottage for 11 days. I bought a plane ticket. I sent my e-transfer on the 1st of October as I always did, because the month wasn't over yet, and I am not a person who abandons commitments midstream. And then I started planning what I was going to pack. I didn't tell Audrey I was going. I didn't tell anyone, really, except my neighbor Phyllis, who has a key to my house and waters my plants when I travel. Phyllis is 70 and very sensible, and when I told her where I was going, she said, "Good for you," and didn't ask any more questions, which is one of the things I appreciate most about Phyllis. I flew to Vancouver on a Tuesday, rented a car, and drove up to Tofino that afternoon. The drive on Highway 4 through the mountains is the kind of thing that recalibrates you, whether you want it to or not. I had a playlist going, and halfway through the drive, I turned it off and just drove in silence, because the quiet seemed more appropriate to the landscape. The cottage was small and cedar-paneled and smelled like damp wood and ocean. There was a wood stove I figured out how to use on the second night. The beach was a 10-minute walk through a trail in the trees, and the surf in October was enormous and relentless, and it had no interest in what was happening in my life, which was exactly what I needed. I walked every morning. I read in the afternoons. I'd brought 4 books and finished 3. I ate at the local pub twice and cooked for myself the rest of the time. I made fish tacos from halibut I bought at a stall near the harbor and ate them standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the small window at the trees. On the Thursday, 2 days after I arrived, which meant it was the day of Audrey's wedding, I went to the beach and sat in a rented chair and watched the ocean for most of the afternoon. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about her at 7, falling asleep against my shoulder. I thought about driving her to school in January mornings when it was still dark at 7:30, and the heater in my old Civic took forever to kick in. I thought about sitting with her in the hospital waiting room when she was 19 and had her appendix out, and I held her hand until they took her into pre-op. I thought about all of it, and I let myself feel what I felt, which was somewhere between grief and something I can only describe as the particular sadness of finally seeing something clearly. My phone was in my jacket pocket. It buzzed once in the early afternoon, a text from my brother in Hamilton, which I answered. Then it was quiet for a while. Then it started. The first call came at 20 past 3. I felt the vibration, looked at the screen, saw Audrey's name, and put the phone back face down on the armrest. It rang again 4 minutes later. Then again. By the time I walked back to the cottage at 5 o'clock, there had been 17 missed calls. There were also 4 text messages. I read the texts while the kettle boiled. "Dad, why haven't you e-transferred the rent? It was supposed to go on the 1st, Dad. We got a notice from the landlord. This is really stressful. Please call me, Dad. I don't understand what's happening. Just please transfer the money, Dad. Please." Call me. I stood there in the small kitchen, reading those texts, with the kettle starting to whistle behind me, and I noticed something interesting. Not one of those messages asked how I was. Not one of them mentioned the wedding, or the fact that I wasn't there, or what she might have understood now about what it meant that I wasn't there. Every single message was about the money. I poured my tea. I sat down in the armchair by the window that looked into the trees. I thought about what I wanted to say, and more importantly, how I wanted to say it. I wanted to be honest. I did not want to be cruel. There is a difference, and I am old enough to know it. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. "Dad, oh thank God. Where have you been?" "I've been." "Hi, Audrey." "Dad, the rent. I know about the rent. The notice says we're in arrears. The landlord is already." "Audrey." I kept my voice level. Not cold. Just level. "I'm not going to be transferring the rent." A silence. Completely different from the silences on the phone before the wedding. That had been the silence of someone managing a conversation. This was the silence of someone whose ground had shifted under their feet. "What do you mean you're not?" "I mean I won't be paying it. Not this month. Not going forward." "Dad, why? What's going on? Are you okay? Did something happen?" "I'm fine. I'm in Tofino, actually. It's beautiful out here. You'd like the beach. What are you doing in Tofino?" "Watching the ocean. Mostly, Dad." Her voice shifted into something I recognized. the tone she used when she was frightened and trying not to show it. I don't understand. You've been paying the rent for 6 years. You can't just... I can, though. I paused. Audrey, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. She didn't say anything. Do you know how much money I've transferred into that apartment over the past 6 years? A long pause. Dad, do you know the number? Have you ever added it up? I've always been grateful. That's not what I asked. The number, Audrey. Do you know it? Silence. $165,000, I said. Give or take. I heard her breath catch. I've never asked for any of it back, I continued. I've never made you feel guilty about it. At least, I've tried not to. I helped because you're my daughter, and I wanted to help. But I was also, all this time, the man you apparently couldn't fit onto a guest list. She started to say something. I'm not looking for an explanation right now, I said. I've had some time to sit with it, and I think I understand well enough. I just want you to know that this is not an accident or a banking error. I've made a deliberate decision. The decision is that I'm not going to continue paying the rent on an apartment for 2 adults who are now married and together make enough to cover it themselves, especially given, well, everything. Dad, we can't afford. Then you'll need to figure that out. You're adults. You're a married couple. I believe in you. I meant that. I wasn't being sarcastic. You'll figure it out. Curtis, she started. Curtis is your husband now, I said. That means he's your partner in everything, including the rent. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that I think she hadn't planned to say. Something that came out before she could stop it. I didn't think you'd find out until after, she said. About the wedding. I thought you'd just think we decided on a small thing. How small was it? I asked. Another pause. We had about 90 guests. Right, I said. Right. We stayed on the line in silence for a moment. The light through my cottage window was going gold. Outside, a raven landed on a fence post and looked at me sideways. I need you to understand something, I said. And for the first time, I could feel something coming into my voice that was harder to control. Not anger, exactly. Something more like the feeling you get when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and you finally set it down. I was not embarrassed that I wasn't there. I was not embarrassed at the party I missed. What I couldn't get past was imagining myself sitting in my house in Mississauga on the night of your wedding, transferring money to your landlord, not knowing. That's the part that I couldn't sit with. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Smaller. Something in it that I hadn't heard in a while. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't, not yet. That kind of okay takes time. I know you are, I said. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about the rent and not about logistics, just talked. She told me that Curtis's mother had pushed very hard on the guest list, that there had been arguments about it, that Audrey had told herself I wouldn't really mind, that I was a practical person and I'd understand. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said gently that I thought she'd known at some level that I would mind, and that telling herself otherwise had been the easier choice, and that I understood why she'd made it, but that she'd need to own it. She cried a little. I listened. Before I hung up, she asked if she could call me again tomorrow. Of course, I said. I'm not going anywhere for another week. Call me whenever you want. I made dinner that night. Pasta with canned tomatoes and garlic. Nothing fancy. And ate it looking out the window at the dark. The wind had picked up, and I could hear the surf from the cottage. The following weeks were not easy. I'm not going to pretend they were. Audrey and Curtis had to have some hard conversations with each other about money, and hard conversations with Curtis's parents about whether some financial support might flow in their direction for once, and hard conversations with their landlord about whether a short-term payment plan was possible. They figured it out. It took them about 6 weeks, and it was uncomfortable, and it was exactly the kind of thing that two 30-something adults who are married and employed should be able to work through. I stayed out of it. I mean that. I didn't offer advice unless asked. I didn't intervene. I didn't quietly slip them money when it got hard. I had made my decision, and I kept it. What I did do was call every Sunday, Not because I was keeping tabs on them, but because I decided that whatever else was going to change, I wasn't going to become the kind of father who disappears when he's hurt. That's not the kind of person I want to be. I was hurt. That was true. But she was still my daughter, and the maple tree in my backyard was hers too, in a way. Around Christmas, a couple of months after all of this, Audrey asked if she could come for the holidays. Just her, for a few days. She said Curtis was going to his parents in Barrie. I said yes, without hesitating. She arrived the 23rd. I had the house warm, and there was a tree up, because I always put up a tree, even when it's just me, because I like the way it looks in the front window at night. She came in the door with snow on her coat and a bottle of wine under her arm, and she looked at me in a way that she hadn't looked at me in a long time. Really looked. Not the distracted, managing look I'd gotten used to, but actually looked the way she used to when she was small, and I was the person who had all the answers. She put down her bag and she hugged me, and she held on longer than usual. I should have invited you, she said quietly into my shoulder. Yes, I said. You should have. We let go. I took her coat. I poured us each a glass of the wine she'd brought, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we used to. And I told her about the raven that had watched me through the cottage window in Tofino, and she laughed, and it sounded like the real thing. I didn't expect us to fix everything over Christmas. That's not how things get fixed. But there's a version of starting over that doesn't require going back to the beginning. And that Christmas felt like the first day of that. We cooked together on Christmas Eve, her mother's recipe for tourtière, which Audrey had somehow retained all these years, and I had never managed to replicate on my own. We ate too much and watched a movie, and she fell asleep on the couch around 10 with a blanket over her legs, and I turned off most of the lights and sat in the armchair across from her in the glow of the tree and just sat there for a while, quietly, the way you sit when you're not waiting for anything and you don't need anything to be different than it is. Some things between us are still being rebuilt. I won't pretend otherwise. There are conversations we haven't had yet, questions about Curtis and about the years I felt myself being slowly moved to the edge of her life that we're going to have to get to eventually, because you can't build anything solid on ground you haven't cleared. But we're getting there, carefully, honestly, at a pace that feels real. For my part, I went back to Tofino in the spring, the same cottage. I booked it before I even knew whether Audrey and I were going to be okay, because I realized during that first trip that I had spent too many years making myself entirely available and entirely useful, and I had let that become a substitute, for having an actual life of my own. That's not Audrey's fault, not entirely. Some of it was my own choice, made quietly over many years, and at 63, I'm old enough to own that. The surf in April was different from October. Warmer, somehow, or maybe just different light. I walked the beach every morning. I finished 2 books. I ate halibut tacos again at the same counter and looked out the same small window at the same trees. My phone stayed in my pocket, mostly. Nobody called 17 times.